Today, I want to talk about conversational fluency. We often hear people say that a language needn't be difficult to learn. We can achieve conversational fluency with a relatively small vocabulary. Before getting into my video, I have an announcement. You may know that I recently passed 752,000 subscribers here on YouTube. To celebrate this milestone, I'm going to do a special question and answer session with my subscribers. So if you have any specific questions related to language learning, specific languages, or how I managed to grow my channel, please submit them in the comment section. I will answer your questions in the upcoming Q&A session. So please submit your questions. And now for today's video. Point number 1. A conversation implies meaning and utterances going in two directions. It implies that people understand what is being said and that they respond to it. If we say conversationally fluent, to my mind, it means I can talk about a wide variety of subjects, even with mistakes. But I will understand what the person is saying on a wide variety of subjects. If you have two people with a very small vocabulary, they can have a conversation. You good? Yeah, me good. Who he? He friend. Who she? She sister. She good? Yeah, she good. It's a conversation, but it's not fluent. If you want to have a conversation with either a native speaker or someone who is genuinely fluent and has 40,000 to 50,000 words in the language that you are learning, you have no idea what they're going to say. You have no idea which words they're going to use, which structures they're going to use. So you may say something and not be able to respond to whatever comes back at you. So conversational fluency, in my mind, implies that both sides in the conversation have significant familiarity with the language, a significant range of vocabulary, and can converse, albeit with mistakes on a wide variety of subjects. So that's conversational fluency. Let's look at some of the people who provide advice on the internet about how to achieve conversational fluency, which they typically don't define very specifically. For example, Tim Ferriss talks about his 12 sentences to deconstruct any language. This brings us to point number 2, the issue of the structure of a language. I translate these 12 sentences into every new language I study. They help me to understand verb tense, word order, sentence structure, and much more. The apple is red. It is John's apple. I give John the apple. We give him the apple. He gives it to me. She gives it to him. Is the apple red? I want to give it to him. I can't eat the apple. I keep it very compressed on one page. So whenever I get overwhelmed, I can refer back to that. Is it enough to give you an idea of what's in the language? In my opinion, no. You're not going to understand what's said because you won't understand the words. Even using those structures, I've found that it takes so long to get used to new structures in a language. I've noticed that in my conversation reports from my tutors at my language app, which I import into my language app as lessons, I save the words and phrases, and I can look back over 6 months of conversation reports and see that I make the same mistakes week after week. Let's not underestimate how difficult it is for our brains to get used to new structures, even if we understand the rules, even if we know what we're supposed to be saying. Somehow the brain keeps on reverting back to perhaps a pattern that's similar to our native language. It takes a long time. Personal story. I'd like to share a personal story about my language learning journey. When I first started learning Spanish, I struggled a lot with the grammar rules. There were days when I felt like giving up because it seemed so complicated. But then, I found a local language exchange group where I could practice speaking with native speakers. This was a game changer for me. I realized that making mistakes is a part of the learning process, and every mistake brought me one step closer to fluency. The encouragement and support from the community kept me motivated, and eventually, I became conversationally fluent in Spanish. Analyzing language learning. Methods. Let's talk about different language learning methods. One popular method is the immersion approach, where you surround yourself with the language as much as possible. This can include watching movies, listening to music, and even changing the language settings on your devices. The idea is to mimic the way children learn their first language. Another method is the traditional classroom approach, where you follow a structured curriculum and have regular assessments. Both methods have their pros and cons. Immersion can be more engaging and fun, but it requires a lot of self-discipline. On the other hand, the classroom approach provides a clear structure and guidance, but can sometimes be less flexible and exciting. Practical tips. Here are some practical tips for learning a new language. First, set realistic goals. Instead of aiming to be fluent in 3 months, focus on specific milestones like learning 100 new words in a month or being able to hold a basic conversation. Second, make language learning a part of your daily routine. Even 15 minutes a day can make a big difference over time. Third, use a variety of resources. Don't just stick to one textbook or app. Mix it up with podcasts, videos, and language exchange partners. Lastly, stay motivated by tracking your progress. Keep a journal of new words and phrases you've learned, and celebrate your achievements, no matter how small. Expert opinions. Let's look at what some language experts have to say. According to Dr. Stephen Krashen, a well-known linguist, the key to language acquisition is comprehensible input. This means that we learn best when we understand the messages we are exposed to, even if we don't understand every single word. He emphasizes the importance of listening and reading in the target language, as these activities provide rich input that helps us internalize the language naturally. Extended Q&A. Now let's extend the Q&A section. One common question I get is, how do I stay motivated when I feel like I'm not making progress? My answer is to find a learning buddy or join a study group. Having someone to share your journey with can make it more enjoyable and keep you accountable. Another question is, what if I'm too shy to speak in a new language? My advice is to start small. Practice speaking in low-pressure environments, such as language exchange meetups or online forums, where everyone is there to learn and mistakes are expected. Continuing with the original content. So the idea that you can somehow deconstruct a language, and therefore you are now closer to speaking that language, I don't believe. So point number 3. Now we move on to vocabulary. We need vocabulary to understand what's said. And eventually, we need vocabulary to produce the language. And so how do we go about acquiring the vocabulary? I don't believe that a very limited amount of vocabulary is enough. The high-frequency words, we're going to learn them fairly quickly because they're high frequency. But my experience is we need tens of thousands of words to be genuinely conversationally fluent. I don't want to pick on Tim Ferriss, who is a wonderful coach and inspires a lot of people. But he, in one of his videos, talks about mnemonics. Really, all this entails is creating a link between the words that is image-based. So if we have a word like vaca, 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 what does that sound like? Vacuum, maybe. Let's imagine that there is a cow, and it has a really oddly shaped head that looks like the end of a vacuum, and it's sucking up the grass on the ground. All right. So it's cow with a head like a vacuum, sucking up grass. Cow, vacuum, vaca. I just think that you have to invest so much time into each word, building an association, a visual association, when we consider the number of words that we have to learn in the language. I just have never found it worthwhile to invest so much time into mnemonics. Another favorite tool for people who want to acquire vocabulary in a hurry, of course, is spaced repetition systems. The most famous, perhaps, is Anki, or there's Memories. And here again, as I've said before, I think it's so important in language learning that we do things that we enjoy doing, because very often we don't know which learning technique is the most effective. However, if we enjoy what we're doing, we'll continue doing it, and that's the most important thing. That we keep active in the language. However, there is research that shows that in spaced repetition, it's the repetition that's important, and absolute, even regular repetition is just as effective as the sort of random or algorithm-based repetition. And if we do a lot of reading, we will, in fact, encounter words over and over again. So there is some degree of repetition there. It's also true, research shows, and this goes back 10, 15 years, that repetition is one factor that influences our ability to retain words. But diversity of context is another, and in time, it's that diversity of context which becomes more powerful than just how frequently we encounter the word. So this again argues in favor of getting that repetition, getting that repetitive exposure to vocabulary through natural and meaningful context, so that we are also gradually becoming familiar with the language, seeing structures and words in different contexts, becoming more and more comfortable with the language. So those efforts at short-circuiting, the acquisition of the words, I don't think those are that helpful. Unless, of course, people enjoy doing them, which is fine. I must admit that I prefer listening and reading, so I prefer that as my sort of path towards acquiring the words that I need. But when we get then to output, and this is point number 5, we just have to go for it. We can be conversational without being fluent in our conversation. We have to accept that if we're going to get better at speaking, we have to make mistakes. And so we have to be willing to use what we have in a conversation, struggling to understand. Hopefully, we've put enough effort into our input that we have passive vocabulary so that we can understand what is said. And then we can struggle to say what we want to say with mistakes. Go for it, relax, enjoy it, take every opportunity to speak. I think if we do that, and if we avail ourselves of opportunities to use the language in a meaningful way, and here again, I've said before, I'm not a great fan of role-playing or artificial situations, which again is trying to force this conversational fluency. I think it's better to find real situations with real people. We have to try to understand what people are saying to us. It's difficult at first, even if we have the words, even if our comprehension theoretically is there. We are tense. It's a new situation we haven't experienced before. We struggle even to understand, but we have to continue to expose ourselves to these kinds of situations, and gradually, our conversational fluency will improve. So that's my take. Conversational fluency is not easy. It's not a matter of 3 months. It's part of the whole process of language learning, which takes a long time. And I've talked a bit about some of these aspects before, and I invite you to look at some of my earlier videos. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.